After World War II, Sweden enjoyed an economic boom from having come unscathed out of the war. But neutrality had come at the cost of integrity, as the poor readiness had forced the country to make deals with Hitler. Intent on not ending up in the same situation again, Sweden's newfound riches were invested in the so-called total defense, the ability to protect the border while also shielding and maintaining civilian life. Over the coming years, Sweden massively increased military spending, whilst organizing the civilian preparedness for what increasingly seemed like an inevitable invasion from the east. Every man, woman, and child was drilled to be ready for war, knowing exactly what to do and where to go when the siren sounded. And most importantly, to offer resistance at all times in all situations. Östertorrent, Sweden, November 14, 1989. You and some classmates have spent a few days out in the archipelago, cut off from the world. As you return, your boat is suddenly hit by explosive projectiles fired from the shore. You don't know what fired at you or why, but you manage to make it to the shore, injured but alive. It all began with an explosion. After a weekend of successful hunting with your friends, you were headed home just as any other hunting trip would end. Awakening on the archipelago, you were injured, freezing, and terrified of what was happening. Had the East invaded? Did your friends survive the explosion? The only thing the Hjälte knew was that he needed to get first aid immediately. After getting himself together, the survivor was able to find an old rusty handgun. As well, he was able to administer first aid and figured it would be intelligent to gather some items and get to safe shelter. Finding a local map, a church nearby had been marked down. Maybe if he found other survivors of whatever was happening, he could gain some answers. But first things first was getting out of these soaking wet clothes, and then he could focus on what to do next. Exiting the pier house, the Hjälte could smell something rotting like he'd never smelled before. Was someone injured nearby? He had to check to know. Climbing up, he found the dead body of a militia soldier. After his hunting experience, he was used to seeing something dead, so trying to keep his focus on the task at hand, he picked up a slightly better 9mm handgun and started down the road. Finding an abandoned police vehicle, the Hjälte decided to grab some spare ammunition from the trunk. Only to find one of his would-be assailants that possibly attacked his boat. Immediately recognizing it as hostile, and having his experience from the Total Defense program, he took down the machine with extreme prejudice. Continuing onward, he had noticed a hunter's house marked down on the map for new hunters to visit. He could possibly find a better weapon than a handgun there, so the Hjälte decided to head down the barren dirt road. After a small skirmish with the machines, the idea of visiting the hunter's house had proved prosperous. The Hjälte found himself a Messer hunting rifle and scope. Sadly, the scope was damaged beyond repair, so the Hjälte decided it would be safer to abandon it. Upon approaching Ebbeholmen Church, things were eerily quiet. Outside of a few birds chittering in the distance, he couldn't hear any survivors, let alone the friends he had been separated from. Finding a shotgun abandoned in the steeple, and a message on a whiteboard telling him to head to Stenhaga farm, the Hjälte decided to press on. Wasting his time worrying would only get him killed, he thought to himself. After fighting through waves of machines on his way to Stenhaga, he came across a military encampment, and in one of those cages nearby was one of those bastard machines. Had the military caused this all? The Hjälte could only wonder as to what happened over the past weekend.
Hej, det här är Anita. Jag är så ledsen att jag inte kunde ringa förrän nu. Det har varit jävligt stressigt här. Vad tusan är ni någonstans? Alla boende i området måste ta sig till Salthamn omedelbart. Ring Johnny i kyrkan och kolla om han kan köra er. Han vet att pappa inte kan köra längre. Ja, jag måste gå. Vi hörs sen.
Upon arriving at Stenhaga, the message on the answering machine had told him to continue on to Salthamn. Figuring he still had half a day left to get there, the Hjälte continued on. During his travels, he found a strange elgstudsare set in a campfire. Turning back to the road, he noticed smoke billowing up into the air. Upon investigation, it seemed to be a crashed jet. If there wasn't a survivor here, there might be a military-grade weapon to aid him in his travels, though all he found was a rusty Magnus. Finally reaching Salthamn with just a few hours of daylight left, the Hjälte decided to check the civil defense bunker as he had heard its siren in the recording. Finding the power turned off and the sounds of machines close, the Hjälte decided to take it slow and stealthy through the small bunker. After restoring power and grabbing a small breather, the hero found a map labeling the houses of the civil defense members. That would be a good place to look for answers. Leaving the bunker, the Hjälte finds that it is finally nighttime, so deciding he needed rest after the grueling day he had just faced, tried to find rest with the sounds of machines patrolling just outside. All right, so there we go. A little bit of a mammoth first episode, but I think that we uncovered some really interesting things here. One of the big things to start with is that a lot of people had been kind of confused as to how the hero or the Hjalte of the series managed to kind of aspire and overcome the machines where the military and everybody else hadn't. So I believe that with the very tiny amount of backstory that we get towards this character, that we can come up with a number of conclusions that I've managed to fit into this story here. In which case, the Hjalte would regularly go hunting with his friends. If he would regularly go hunting with his friends, then he was probably used to the kind of gore that comes along with cleaning up your kill at the end of a hunting trip. So I kind of took that and applied that to his mentality when running into the dead bodies across the map. Next up, the really cool thing that happened during this playthrough is that that tick managed to spawn inside that cage, and that is supposed to be a very small kind of area-based hint as to what happened and what went down. And I think that just kind of points the blame in the direction of the military. One of the big things that I brought up in the last episode is that the military might have conspired and created this entire disaster. So really, it all calls into question the military's involvement in this whole ordeal. I believe, though, that potentially the military might be a scapegoat for us. It might be a misnomer to lead us away from the kind of foreshadowed direction that we get in the opening rolling text, in which case Sweden's always been preparing for an invasion from the east. So this might, in the end, wind up just being the Russians coming through and hacking into Phoenix, as I had brought up in the last episode. And so throughout this first episode, I kind of really took the time to set up how the hero came into things, because I feel like, again, with the vagueness and with the things that are left up to interpretation, that there's a lot of room to be filled in for how the Hjalte kind of experienced this all. And so that's one of the small things that I'm going to try to bring to this little story explanation. But moving on, now we're going to be going off to our first bunker in the next episode, and things will really, really pick up pace as this goes on. And that's part of the reason why this story is so confusing, because the pace manages to get to a breakneck pace once you hit the mainland in this game for what's going on in this story. But luckily enough, I myself have it all figured out for you dudes, so when we get into the next episode, things will really start to become clear to you guys as to what happened and how the events of Generation Zero kind of transpired. But that's going to be it for this first episode. I've been Tenebris Infinite, you've been awesome, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Until then, peace.